Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Outlandish Talmud Stories and Outstanding Life Lessons. Tonight's topic is Back to the Future. I want to thank Robert and Lorena Lechter for kindly dedicating tonight's class in honor of their anniversary. So Mazal Tov to you. Hashem bless you with many more happy years together, filled with shalom bayis and lots of nachas and joy from your children and lots of simchas in your family. If you would like to dedicate a class and help us, there's a link in the video description, and we would greatly appreciate it and thank you in advance. Also, please download the source sheet of tonight's class. The link is in the video description on your screen. And tonight we are studying a story, truly an outlandish story with truly outstanding lessons from Talmud Ta'anit, page 23a. Back to the Future. No, we're not traveling back in time like the film Back to the Future. Neither are we traveling ahead of time. Unfortunately, or fortunately, in reality, we human beings live in the here and now. Whilst, though, we live in the here and now, we're also a product of the history and the past that came before us and shaped us and our world for as it is now. Also, every moment and every experience and every decision and every action that we do in the present is ultimately somehow shaping the future. And so at any given moment in our lives, it's really a combination of being influenced by the past, being present in the present moment, and impacting the future. What I want to focus on tonight is the importance of all of these, especially in the Jewish tradition and the spiritual value behind this, but particularly something that a lot of people forget or don't recognize the importance, and that is eyes on the future, having foresight, and why it's so incredibly crucial to life in general, and particularly to the Jewish spiritual mission that we have here in this world. So, before we begin our story, I want to share with you a little bit about the subject and the context, the background behind the story. So the subject of our story tonight is a very interesting person. I think we have discussed him once before, and his name is Choni. You may be more familiar if we say his full name, which is his nickname, the way he was referred to, and that's Choni HaMe'agel, which literally means Choni, the circle maker. What's the story behind that? Who was Choni? Choni lived some over 2,000 years ago, during the times of the Second Temple, probably around the 2nd, 3rd century before the Common Era, probably sometime after the Hanukkah story, where the Assyrian Greeks came to attack and defeat Israel in the temple and take over and destroy Judaism as we know it. And the Maccabees, the Hashmonaim, fought back and they won. And then there were the descendants of the royalty. They were Kohanim. They tried to become kings also of the Hashmonaim. At some point there, Choni HaMe'agel lives. Now, if you look at the texts and some historians, there's a suggestion there may have been two Choni HaMe'agels, because we have stories about Choni that appear to happen a century or even more, a couple centuries earlier. And then some want to suggest that there were in fact two, because one was a grandfather or a great-grandfather, one was a descendant. Let's not go into that now. It's not relevant to tonight's story. But tonight's story takes place somewhere around the 2nd century before the Common Era, and it's about Choni, the circle maker. Why is he called Choni, the circle maker? So there's another story to that, a bit of an outlandish story. We're not going to study it now, but I'll tell it to you briefly. There was a time in Jerusalem or in Israel where there was a great drought. Now, a drought is a problem, especially pre-days where we could have unbelievable, sophisticated Israel technology and agricultural systems to be able to draw water through extensive technological plumbing and pumps. So a drought meant that everybody suffers, and there's hunger and there's famine, and it's a time of suffering. And in Israel and places in that region, of course, it could happen. And in those days when it happened, even nowadays, but especially those days, that was a serious calamity. So here's the story about Choni, and you're going to see why this story tells us how great of a person Choni was. He was almost like unique in his generation. In fact, Choni is buried There's the burial site that's attributed to him. It's in the northern Israel near the Galilee, the Galil, near a village called Hatzor Haglilit. Many people have visited there. And here's how we know what a great person Choni was. Because during this drought, the sages turn to Choni and they say, Choni, for some reason, God always listens to you. Do us a favor. You must instruct God or ask God, beseech God to make it rain. Now, being able to manipulate God or being able to beseech God and get your prayers answered to make it rain is very, very unique, more than most other requests for blessings, simply because we are told that most things in this world are bidei adam. We can perform things, to achieve things, to, draw down various blessings. But there's a couple of things that only the keys belong to God himself. No one else has any jurisdiction, any power over those things. And one of those things is the weather or the rain. Now, the weather we know, because even though we think we've developed meteorology to be able to predict 10-day forecast, 1-month forecast, 6-hour forecasts, we know that so often it doesn't really play out as that is. Because the key to meteorology, the key to rains was given to God only, not to humans, even though maybe conspiracists will tell you that humans are doing all kinds of things to manipulate the weather and the patterns in the skies. Maybe not. But in general, this belongs to God. So the human to be able to cause or manipulate or pressure God to make it rain takes a very, very unique person. Sure enough, what does Choni do? Choni draws a circle on the ground in the sand, and he stands inside the circle. This is why he's called the circle maker. And he turns to God and he says, Dear God, I am not stepping outside of this circle until you make it rain. Something like a hunger strike. And he's praying and he's praying and he's beseeching God, you must make it rain. I'm telling you, I'm not stepping outside this circle. I'll be forever if need be. Sure enough, a little while later, God acquiesces because I guess he has compassion on him. He doesn't want him to stay there forever. He wants him to go home to his family and eat dinner tonight. So God makes a few droplets of rain come from the skies. Choni, I've answered your prayer. Choni turns to God, not satisfied. And he says, God, that's not what I asked for, a few droplets of rain. What can that do for us? I'm asking for serious rain to be able to water the fields and make things grow. We shouldn't be dying of hunger and starvation. Well, God wanted to teach him a bit of a lesson, to tell him who's boss. Don't think that you can manipulate everything over here. And so suddenly God sends torrential flood-like rains all over the land of Israel. Now, these were harmful rains because nobody can benefit from these. These can cause a lot of damage, a lot of flooding, and especially the homes, the way they were built in those days. Flooding meant everything would collapse and people would die from the flood instead of from the drought. So the people ran over to Choni and says, this is really cool what you did, but this is not what we asked for. Now we're going to die from the flood, from the water instead. So Choni turns to God and says, God, listen here. I didn't ask for little droplets. I didn't ask for flood-like torrential rains. I asked for normal rain, healthy rain that can irrigate our land. Sure enough, God changes the weather and it rains beautifully, just the right way to fill up all the cisterns, the reservoirs, to water the fields, and within a short time, the fields came back to life and they had what to eat. And then Choni stepped out of the circle and went home. Now, the story goes that the sages were very conflicted. His colleagues were very conflicted about this because on the one hand, wow, that's impressive. On the other hand, they sent a message to Choni and they said, the truth is you're deserving of being excommunicated. Who the heck do you think you are to be able to manipulate and force and pressure God to do these things? This is not in your domain. This is in God's domain. You mixed into something that's none of your business. We would excommunicate you. However, you happen to be Choni. You happen to be somebody that apparently God listens to, God enjoys. I mean, you speak it, you commit, you decree and God fulfills. So we know not to touch you, to stay away from you. That's the story of Choni, why it becomes known as Choni, the circle maker. Obviously a miracle man, a great tzaddik, a very holy person, but not just a holy, pious person, but a tremendous, well-respected sage in his time, which we're going to learn in tonight's story. So let's turn to the source sheet, Talmud, Ta'anit, page 23a, one story for tonight, and learn another story about Choni. I hope you have the text in front of you. Rabbi Yochanan said, all the days of the life of that righteous man Choni, he was distressed over the meaning of the following verse. in Psalms chapter 126. You should know in Psalms chapter 120 to 134, there are 15 chapters that begin with the words Shir HaMa'alot. Shir HaMa'alot, beautiful, shorter and longer ones, praises and descriptions of the glory of God that King David authored, and there's 15 of them. Now, just by the way, what's the meaning of the words Shir HaMa'alot? And this is something that is argued by the commentaries. Shir means a song, HaMa'alot. So typical translations, if you look in most Tehillims, it's translated as a song of ascent. The word Ma'alot from the word Aliyah is to go up, the song that elevates you. And truly, when you recite Tehillim, when you sing these songs, and if you understand them and you connect with them, internalize them, they elevate you. There is another explanation that the word Ma'alot, even in modern Hebrew today, means steps or stairs. Maybe in modern Hebrew it's madregot, but Ma'alot means steps. In the Torah, we have the word steps and stairs. The Song of Steps. What's the idea of the Song of Steps? So if you're familiar in the temple, going from the general courtyard up to the courtyard where only the Kohanim could be and the actual worship took place, there were 15 semicircle steps. Similar to the steps right behind me, there were just 3 steps. There were 15 of them going up to these glorious, majestic gates. They were called Sharei Nicanor, the gates of Nicanor. It's a long story. Nicanor, the Roman, donated these gates to the temple. And that's where the Levites would stand and sing songs and play music and instruments. So 15 of these songs were composed, corresponding one per each stair, and therefore it's the song of the stairs. And perhaps it's these songs, in fact, these 15 chapters, which the Levites sang in the temple. So in Psalm 126, one of those 15 Shir HaMa'alot, Choni always had a struggle understanding one of the verses. And the verse goes like this: a song of ascents. That's how it's translated over here. When the Lord brought back those who returned to Zion, we were like those who dream. You may be familiar with this because we recite this on Shabbat before we do the Birchat Hamazon. Shihira mahalot b'shuv Hashem et shivat Zion hayinu kechomim. When God brought us back to Jerusalem, after 70 years, remember when the Jews were first exiled after the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians, they were exiled to Babylon, and the prophecy was 70 years later the Jews were going to return to Israel and rebuild the second temple. The prophecy came true. They came back to Israel, and the Levites are singing, and King David is singing that those years were like a dream. What is the metaphor of the dream, like 70 years of exile? So Choni asked himself, is there really a person who can sleep and dream for 70 years? How is it possible to compare the 70-year exile in Babylonia to a dream? What's the meaning of the metaphor dream? I mean, if it was anything but a dream, it was difficult life in exile. The Jews happened to have settled in Babylon pretty nicely and really rebuilt Jewish community there, but they were away from their homeland. They didn't have sovereignty there. Ultimately, the Babylonians were not the biggest fans. Later it was the Persians. The Persians tried to kill all the Jews, the Purim story. So what's this idea that those 70-year exile was like a dream? That is Choni's question. Now, one day, he was walking along the road when he saw a certain man planting a carob tree. Choni said to him, "This tree, after how many years does it bear fruit?" The man said to him, "It will not produce fruit until 70 years have passed." It's going to take 70 years. By the way, I'm not certain about the botanical science behind this because I looked up recently and it takes apparently 7 years for fruits to grow from a carob tree. What does it mean, 70? I think some of the commentators explain that there's a different quality of fruits. The best fruits grow after 70 years. Or maybe in those days it took 7 years to grow carob. I'm not sure, but according to this story, at least his answer told him, 70 years we're going to wait until we get the fruits, the carob from the tree. So Choni said to him, "Is it obvious to you that you will live 70 years, that you expect to benefit from this tree? You really think, maybe you're a young man now. I don't know how old you are, in your 20s, in your 30s. You think you're going to be around in 70 years to enjoy the fruits of this tree?" We have a comment that says Menachem Begin recited the Shir HaMa'alot when he signed the peace agreement with Anwar Sadat. Yes, and you should know that there, I believe, in deciding for the anthem for the modern state of Israel, the national anthem, this song, and I think even this tune, which is a tune attributed to Cantor Yossel Rosenblatt, Shir HaMa'alot B'Shuv, right? That was a suggestion to be the national anthem. Ultimately, a different song was chosen. Thank you very much, Gary. So he's asking this person, why are you planting this tree if you're not going to be around to reap its fruit? So the person responds to him, that man, meaning me, found a world full of carob trees. I have a carob tree over there which I eat fruits from, and one over there which I eat fruits from. In other words, he's saying, just as my ancestors planted for me, I too am planting for my descendants. Somebody 70 years ago or more thought about me because they planted it. They're not here to reap the fruits, but I am. So I'm doing the same gesture, the same kindness. I'm planting these fruits here, this tree here, so that in 70 years' time, my grandchildren or great-grandchildren will, or somebody else down there in that generation, will reap the benefits of the fruits of the carob from my hard work. Which, by the way, anecdotal, this tells us that the carob tree, and this is how these spiritual masters look at carob tree, symbolizes being charitable, being generous, and being considerate of others. That's the idea of the carob tree. If you're going to plant a carob tree, it means you're thinking ahead about other people in 70 years' time who you're never going to know and never going to meet, in all probability. This is an important metaphor. Where else do you remember about a carob tree? There's a festival in the Jewish calendar that we eat carob, and it's the festival of Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer, we're celebrating how Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Eliezer were running away from the Romans because the Romans wanted to kill them. They hid in a cave for 12 years. How did they survive in the cave for 12 years? God made a miracle. A carob tree grew right there near the cave, and a stream of water flowed through the cave. So they had fruits and water, a wonderful diet to survive 12 years. Why the carob tree? Could be many reasons. But one suggestion is that recall what happened after those 12 years when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son came out. So they spent 12 years in isolation, immersed in study, in Torah, thinking about this idealistic way to live in this universe, just a life of meditation, a life of isolation, connecting with God, praying, studying a whole day. When they came out of the cave 12 years later and they saw people wasting their time working the land and buying flowers for their wives and doing all kinds of menial things, he got very upset. And they both said, what are you wasting your time for? If this is what you came down to this world to do such petty things, you should be sitting immersed in prayer and study like we were doing for the last 12 years. So much so they had this power where they zapped these people and these people died. We learned this story before together. So God says, that's what you came to my world, out of the cave for, to destroy my world. Get back into the cave. You have another year of rehab to do to figure out. So what was supposed to happen is during those 12 years where they were involved in this unique state of isolation, connecting with God in a very special way, but the carob tree was growing there. The carob tree should have served as a symbol to them. This was a miraculous carob tree, but normally it takes 70 years to plant it, meaning the carob represents just because you're capable of living this kind of life, but recognize and respect and be considerate about others who live a different kind of life, who behave differently than you, who think a little differently than you. They're still beautiful and God still loves them. They don't have to live the way that exactly you want to live or you're capable of living. So they should have learned from the carob tree. We should all learn from a carob tree. Okay, so Choni receives that wonderful answer. Let's get back to the story, third paragraph. He's tired. He's been walking around for a long time. So Choni sits and he eats bread and he gets full and his body's digesting and he's getting tired. So sleep overcomes him and he falls asleep there on the field. God made a miracle. A rock formation, a cliff formed around him and he disappeared from sight. Nobody could see him anymore. He was like buried in the cave in his sleep. And he slept for 70 years. When he awoke, I told you it's an outlandish story. When he awoke, after 70 years, he's fresh, he's refreshed. I mean, he thinks he's just slept for the night, perhaps. He thinks it's the next morning. He wakes up, he's feeling good. And he walks out and he sees a certain person gathering carobs, fruits from the tree. He thinks, wow, I must have slept a little longer than I thought. It's already growing carobs. And what's going on over here? So he turns to that person and he says, are you the person that I just spoke to recently? Are you the person who planted this tree? And the person tells him, I didn't plant this tree. I'm that person's son's son. I'm the grandson. My grandfather planted this tree. Choni is shocked. The grandson. So he says, I can learn from this that I have slept for 70 years. And indeed, he turns around and he sees that he used to have one donkey or two donkeys next to him. And he sees that his donkey has sired several herds during those many years. He has a whole family of donkeys, generations of livestock that he now owns over these 70 years. It's hard to imagine this story, but this is the story. So he's come. It's like nowadays we see people who, heaven forbid, but if in the 90s or early 2000s and they're sent to prison for 10, 20 years, and they come out, and this world has changed so fast that somebody I know who was sent to prison about 15 years ago for about 10 years or so, he came out and people were taking selfies with him, and he had no idea about a selfie. I mean, the smartphones, I don't even know if they existed. And even the old generation smartphones, I don't know if they had screen cameras on the front with the screen. So selfies became a thing very recently. So this family is celebrating taking selfies with him, and he has no idea what selfies are. He's probably better off that way. So Choni comes to a new world. I don't think in those days 7 years changed things dramatically, but the fact is this carob tree is now here, and his donkey is multiplied into a big family. He has to adjust over here. So he goes home and he goes to the members of his household, fourth paragraph, and he says, is the son of Choni HaMa'agal still alive? In other words, is my son still alive? They said to him, Choni HaMa'agal's son already passed away, but his son's son is alive. The grandson is alive. He's talking to his family. The grandchildren are alive. And he tells them, by the way, FYI, just so you should know this, I am Choni HaMa'agal. I am Choni, the circle maker. Now, they did not believe him. He went to the study hall, and they're busy studying Torah there. And he heard the sages say about one scholar. There was one scholar in the room who was illuminating the room with his wisdom. Whenever a question arose, he had the answer. Whenever there was a challenge, somebody didn't understand how to interpret something, he was there and he was providing delicious interpretations of the Torah. So when he was doing that, the rabbis in the room they commented that this person's halachot, his interpretations, his rulings, his teachings are as enlightening and as clear as in the years of Choni HaMa'agal. That just like Choni HaMa'agal from many years ago, now we see how great he was. He too, we remember, used to illuminate the whole room with his wisdom. For when Choni HaMa'agal would enter the study hall, he would resolve for the sages any difficulty they had. He helped everybody in their difficulties in their learning. So Choni is listening to this whole conversation, how they're reminiscing about the Choni HaMa'agal who once upon a time illuminated the study hall. So he turns to them and he says, friends, I got bad news or I got good news for you. I'm here. It's me. I'm Choni HaMa'agal. But they did not believe him either. And they did not pay him proper respect. They just mocked him. They laughed at him. I guess he had changed over those 7 years. He probably looked very different. He had aged, I'm sure. And nobody believed him. His family didn't believe him in the study hall. Nobody believed he's the same guy. He had no friends. He had no family. Now listen to the end of the story. Choni became very upset. He prayed for mercy and he died. He said, I have no reason to live anymore. No family, no friends. Rava, the sage Rava, commented about this episode. This explains the expression that people say, Chavrusa oy misusa, friendship or death. You have to have one or the other in life. You have to live with a circle of friendship, with a social support circle, with family, with friends. You have to be among the people. You need people in your life to help you, to support you, to connect with. And if you don't have that, you may as well die. Now that's a very harsh expression, and we're not chas v'shalom condoning anybody to take such drastic actions, heaven forbid. But we are explaining the importance of building a strong social circle of support and of friendship. Choni chose to die. Now, that is an outlandish story. And I want to break this down a little bit because there's so many pieces here that we can learn from, and I'm not going to cover it all tonight, but I want to discuss two themes that I think we can really take away from the story. So, theme number 1, learning from the carob tree. The person who plants the carob tree thinking about generations later, his grandchildren or others who are going to benefit from the carob tree, from the fruits. We have here a very important and very profound lesson about patience and about the nature of success. There is a famous expression, it's one of my favorite expressions, and it says, instant success takes time. It's a beautiful expression. We live in a world where our younger generation thinks that success means that right away, out of college, right away as a young adult, they need to be accomplishing big things and realizing big successes right away. And this is a grave mistake, because this is completely unnatural. This is completely against the way of the world. Any situation that a person can find where somebody experienced big accomplishments and big successes very quickly right away is a complete anomaly. That's not how things go. That's not the way of the world, even though the world is changing so much. The way of the world is that success happens gradually over time, building it up. There is the famous concept called the domino effect. The domino effect is a wonderful experiment where when you line up dominoes together, so typically when you have a domino set, they're all the same size, you're lining them up. But the truth is that scientifically, the physics here is that when a domino has the power, the force, when you push it over, to knock over another domino that is 1.5 times its size. Okay? So here's the experiment, and you can watch this online. There's this person who took 13 dominoes. The first one was just 5 millimeters tall and 1 millimeter thick. It's a tiny domino. He's holding it in tweezers. He puts it down. Next to it is a domino that is 1.5 times the size. Next to it, again, 1.5 times the size. If you do the math, the 13th domino is a domino that is taller than a meter, than 3 feet, and weighs 100 pounds. And you can take this first domino that is 5 millimeters tall, 1 millimeter thick, it's tiny, it doesn't weigh anything. And if you follow this pattern and you start the process of a domino effect, the 13th domino, which is 100 pounds, gets knocked over. Unbelievable buildup of energy and power. And what the person explained was that if you continue this till the 29th domino in this system will be the size of the Empire State Building, and it might even have the power to knock it over. So with 29 dominoes, you could knock over the Empire State Building. Just amazing. But what we learn here is the power of growth when things start very small. Small steps, small decisions, small accomplishments, and you build up on each other, and you end up with very large successes and accomplishments. That's how it goes. We have this challenge or this issue in life that we're exposed, or our children are exposed to really successful people. Now, when I say successful, of course, we have to define what successful people means, but let's just talk about the people in the media, lots of money, lots of accomplishment. Let's just talk about somebody who you either love him or you hate him, but Elon Musk, for example. So we're looking at people on they're already 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years in what they do, and they're coming out with their results, and our children are thinking that you can become that person in one day. Elon Musk, we know, just you should know, his brother, I think, said this about him once. As a teenager in school, he used to read 2 books a day. Elon Musk spent 10 years in school. He was studying physics at the University of Pennsylvania, battery technology at Stanford, which were key studies that helped him, shaped many of his accomplishments, especially the electric car. So we're seeing him 20, 30 years into his journey and admiring his accomplishments. Gary Keller, who was the founder of one of the great real estate franchises in the world, Keller Williams. In his book, he writes the following: when you see someone who has a lot of knowledge, they learned it over time. When you see someone who has a lot of skills, they develop them over time. When you see someone who has done a lot, they accomplish it over time. When you see someone who has a lot of money, they earned it over time. It takes time. Instant success takes time, a long time. And you have to be able to wait out those 70 years. You have to recognize that the 70 is the metaphor, that the fruits come later if you put the right work in. A decision today, it may seem minuscule, it may seem, and this could be in your business, this can be in your personal development, and you may think like, well, I just made a tiny little change to my diet, a tiny little change to my routine, my daily schedule, a tiny little change, I started to do for 5 minutes a day, I started to read, or for 5 minutes a day, I started to meditate, or I started to walk or work out. That's amazing. That's 5 minutes more than yesterday. And in all probability, it's going to keep growing and growing like the domino effect. Malcolm Gladwell says in his book, Outliers, that he has researched and studied this. And for all people who have perfected or achieved greatly in their particular expertise, major sports people in their skill set or academics or others, the Beatles and their music, and he has this idea that it takes 10,000 hours to hone and perfect your skill set. 10,000 hours. That takes many years to get your 10,000 hours in. Now, there's a lot of commentary on this thesis, and let's not go into that, but the concept still is generally true. So, Choni is teaching us, Choni learned over here, that you need to be patient. You need to recognize that your life, today is the first day of the rest of your life. And all the accomplishments you want to see, there's no timeline to them. You just have to keep moving forward. You have to keep adding. You have to keep growing, small seeds at a time. Consistency is much more important. It doesn't help to just go all out on one day, 1 week, because have this binge and you have this adrenaline and we're going to do something, and a month later you've given up because you didn't see the result, or even if you did see the result, you need to be a consistent person. You need to have the vision and the plan, right, of the future and be able to work towards it slowly. In Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, Rabbi Tarfon in the Mishnah teaches us similar but a different concept. He says, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It is not your responsibility to finish the job. Be'enate ben chorin li batal mimenu. But you're not a free person to absolve yourself or take yourself away from the hard work. So we think about life and the jobs we want to finish or perfect or achieve. Maybe your eyes or your sights are on the wrong thing. We're not here to finish things. We're here to work hard and to make a change and to make an influence and to push things forward a little further, so that once we've finished our lives, the world is a little different than when we came into this world, because we gave our all towards making a change, making a difference, and growing and succeeding on the level that we're capable of. So this is a really important idea. We're losing sight of this in our modern, technological, quick-paced world. And therefore, people are getting very frustrated and very dispirited and depressed when they're not seeing the results at the pace that they think things should go. And we need to be counseling ourselves and our colleagues and our children to work hard and put the effort in. And we have this concept in this Jewish teaching that there's a chazakah, there's an absolute certainty that hard work always pays off. Will it pay off exactly the way you thought or wanted it to pay off? Maybe, maybe not. We don't always control the results of our hard work, but there are always results, whether it's the results we planned on or different kinds of results, but hard work equals results. And not putting in hard work and not having patience and not having consistency will not result in things that we're supposed to be achieving. So that's lesson number one, in patience, in consistency, in success, that we're learning from the carob tree. I want to move into lesson number two. And this is about the idea that we started off with, about learning how to live with foresight, live being very mindful of the future. Some people live in the past experiences, past events of their lives. Maybe they're positive events, so they always live in the past and they say, once upon a time it was so good. When we were young, we had it better. My past job was much better than this one. My past relationship, everything was better in the past. Or it could be a negative past experience, and there's maybe a certain trauma or a suffering, and they can't let go, and they can't move on from there, and they're stuck in that. No matter how much they try, it always comes to haunt them, and they need a lot of help. These people are stuck in the past. Some people live totally in the present. Living in the present, very powerful, very important, but also very short-sighted. Because sometimes living in the present just results in seeking a life of pleasure versus pain. I'm just worried about here and now. And here and now, I want to feel good. I want it to look good. And I will pursue the path of pleasure, and I'll run away from the path of pain. Pleasure and pain are not very good barometers of what's good and what's not good in life, what's wrong and what's right. But we're just living for the here and now. There's the famous expression in Tanakh, eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die. If I'm just here for right now, I better just make the most of the moment. So there can be this kind of negative consequence from just living in the present. There's a lot of important things about living in the present, of course, and we've spoken about that before. And then there's living in the future. Living in the future means what shapes my decisions, what shapes my thinking, what shapes my daily schedule and my priorities is not if I'm stuck in the past, is not the pursuit of pleasure for the present moment, but it's my goal or what I see down the line in the future. And everything about what I do and how I do it is shaped by the future. Now, we need to live in all three. Our past is super important because it shaped us into who we are now. Our present is very important because it is the moment now, which we should be taking control over and living in and experiencing wholeheartedly. But then there's the future. This text, this story of the Talmud, of the story of the carob tree, is often used to promote the ideas of conscious, responsible environmentalism. And this is an important point, and it's one small detail of what I really want to talk about. But yes, let's just dwell on this for a moment. So clearly, science is telling us that we're not being very environmentally responsible in the world. And we're not protecting our universe as the Torah tells us we should be protecting. And therefore, a lot of changes are happening. Now, I do not necessarily buy into the very fearful predictions of science. Like somebody recently emailed me something, and I'm going to read it out because some people actually believe like this. And it says, sea levels have risen between 4 and 8 inches in the past 100 years. Current projections suggest that the sea levels will continue to rise between 4 inches and 36 inches over the next 100 years. A 36-inch increase in sea levels would swamp every city on the east coast of the United States from Miami to Boston. The rapid nature of climate change is likely to exceed the ability of many species to migrate or adjust. Experts predict that 1/4 of the Earth's species will be headed for extinction by the year 2050 if the warming trend continues at its current rate. Breathe. I don't know about all that. This is not my field. But I have a lot of faith also that God will help us protect the universe. But we have a mitzvah to protect the universe. And here we have somebody who is planting his garden or doing something not just to make the garden look nice and pretty for now, not just to do a work on their home or work that is benefiting them right now, no matter the consequences in the future to the future generations, children and grandchildren. I mean, in America, we're collecting national debt like it's popcorn. And there's a lot of interesting or unfortunate things that at this rate we're leaving to our children and grandchildren. So the lesson here, of course, is that we have the responsibility and the duty not just to live in the present moment of gaining the satisfaction we look for ourselves, but how do our decisions and our actions influence the next generation, the generation after, and even further from that. There's a beautiful, famous line that, where does it come from? Some say it comes from the Constitution of the Iroquois Nations. The Iroquois Nations, which is the early native nations here in the United States, at some point between the 15th, 16th, 17th century, and there was the great founder of peace, the Great League of Peace. I've forgotten his name right now. And they wrote a constitution. And in there, they write something very important and powerful, which anybody in leadership needs to know this. As a rabbi, I think about this all the time. Anyone that's shaping policy, anyone that's making decisions, anyone that's trying to project the way of the future. And they wrote, in every deliberation, we must consider the impact on the seventh generation, even if it requires having skin as thick as the bark of a pine. When we decide matters, we decide them on two levels. When we deciding for ourselves or in leadership for the community, for the society, for the country. When we decide matters, on the one hand, we have to decide on the merits of them here and now. Are they legal, lawful? Are they beneficial? Do they promote peace, safety, security, value, priorities, etc.? But at the same time, you have to figure out another question. How is this decision going to play out the next generation, in 7 generations' time, but I would argue even further for the rest of history, or for the rest of the world, as much as we can predict for right now? So we're always thinking about the future because we care about it. It's our duty. But let's take this more broader than just environmentalism. Let's take this as the general, what I would say, the Jewish spiritual narrative of the universe. Think about this. When the world was created, why did God create the universe? He didn't create it because he was bored. He didn't create it because there was the fad of the time. He didn't create it just on a whim. He created it because he had a really deliberate intention and purpose for what should happen over here. And our Kabbalists explain to us that the world was created in a way of, there was a mixture of the forces of goodness and holiness that were mixed up and together and concealed by the forces of evil, the forces of those which opposed godliness, truth, peace. And this world is therefore called Olam HaTikun. It's the world of repair. And the point of this whole, I won't say experiment, but the point of this whole production that you and I are in, and all previous generations are in, and all future generations, we're part of the same story called humanity in this universe, is there's a goal. And the goal is that the world will become repaired. Brokenness, places where the forces of evil, the forces that oppose godliness and truth and peace, which conceal over the forces of goodness, or which into it, and don't allow for perfection in this world, and don't allow for true peace, true happiness, true honesty, but rather infiltrate and plague the world on a personal level, on a collective level, that the universe is plagued by these forces, and these forces of concealment are what cause, ultimately, on every level, but they trickle down all the way to the cause for jealousy and war and illness and disruption and discord. And Hashem says, it's your task to work on repairing this world. And the goal, the end of days, as the prophets call it, is the world will achieve its perfection. We call it Geula, we call it redemption. That will be the time when we humans have successfully refined the universe, successfully repaired the universe, successfully called the bluff of the universe, successfully separated and filtered the good from the bad, and eradicated forces of evil, eradicated forces that are promoting discord and jealousy and lack of peace and illness and all those things, and brought about the truth of the nature of this world, which is the godly creative force behind everything that's creating this perfection of symmetry, orchestrating everything in this universe. A world where everything is cohesive. Everyone's living in a peaceful way, in a prosperous way, in a way that God's presence is truly recognized. The truth is revealed. And we're in that process of achieving that. And every single one of us, if you're created here in this world, it's because you are necessary, says God. Maybe others feel otherwise, but never value yourself based on how others feel about you. It's irrelevant. What do they know? God knows. He created you. And he said that you are essential. to this whole mission. You have a piece of this universe that only you can repair. And our whole lives are spent in distilling the good from the bad within ourselves and within our circle of influence around us, and trying to promote, overwhelm this world with the forces of Hashem, of godliness, with the forces of goodness and kindness and honesty and truth and justice. And in that way to suppress and eradicate other negative forces which try to oppose that and conceal that. This is the goal. That was the goal since the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, were created. And so, it is that goal, which is the goal of the future, the goal of the end of days, that's why we're here, that ought to be at the forefront of every single person's mind all the time. Because that needs to shape your life's direction, your life's trajectory, your life's interest, your life's priorities, your hobbies, your activities, your decisions, the way your choices you make, how you apply your talents to your work, your job, your family, where you choose to live, how you choose to connect with others, everything that you do should be shaped by that one idea. And that one idea is repairing the universe. Anybody who lives that way is a great person, is a hero, lives a truly purposeful, meaningful life. Anybody who ever loses sight of that, whether they don't know about it, they've forgotten about it, it's gone to the back recesses of their mind, it's not at the forefront of their mind, and therefore what is at the forefront of their mind? They're consumed with the here and now, they're consumed with the past, they're just distracted by the pleasure and pain pursuit of life. They don't live a purposeful life or a meaningful life. And it's hard to imagine they're ever going to really accomplish their personal mission here in this world. There's an experiment they did on children, but they should do it on adults also, maybe in a bit of a different way. It's the famous experiment called the marshmallow test, Stanford University, 1972. There were various variations of this, but in a nutshell, they wanted to test children. They did this first experiment, I think, on 32 children, 16 boys, 16 girls, and they sat them down in front of a table, and there was one marshmallow on the table. And they told the child, you have two choices. One choice is, you can eat this marshmallow now, if you wish, or I'm leaving the room, says the grown-up in the room, I'm coming back in 15 minutes. If you can wait 15 minutes, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. Which one will you choose? And officially at the time, the experiment told us that those children who were able to see further, see eyes on the prize, look ahead, and allow the future to shape their decisions right now, even though it's incredibly tempting for a 2-year-old child to grab this marshmallow when you can get it and enjoy it and get all sticky and pleasure from this marshmallow, yet the eyes on the future and the results and the goal was able to help them control and regulate themselves and guide them. So those children later were found in life to have much better successes in their academics, in their grades, in school, in jobs, in family, in relationships. That's how it was believed. And that's what was the result of the study. I believe since then the study has been, there's a lot. It's not as simple as we make it out to be, because there are many other factors, economics, for example, which shape the potential future of children's lives, but it doesn't take away from the merit of this experiment. And that is, what is controlling us right now? Is it the impulses, the urges, the thrills of the moment? Or is it the ability to have the endurance and the wisdom and the patience and the foresightedness of understanding what is the goal? And we turn to the Jewish narrative, the spiritual narrative, to teach us about the goal in life, and that shapes us. And even though there's plenty other ways to have a lot of fun and leisure and good time in life, but where's it going to get me? It may only get me 1 marshmallow, but I'm looking for 2. I'm looking for much more at the end of the day. I'll tell you something interesting. We're a post-Holocaust generations. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. My parents grew up in Holocaust survivors' homes, 2nd generation, I'm 3rd generation. Again, the idea of living in the past, present, future is very powerful over here, because Judaism is not a Holocaust Judaism, and Israel is not a Holocaust reward. That's living in the past, and that's not correct. But let's just take an example. After the Holocaust, Jewish leaders were coming together to try to figure out how to commemorate, how to remember, how to rebuild, how to move forward. And if you look at the decisions of Jewish leaders, Jewish philanthropists, Jewish influencers at that time, you can see that the decisions generally fall under one of three categories: past, present, and future. Some said, we have to build museums. We have to build memorials. Every synagogue, every community center needs to have a fancy memorial. Every town needs to have one. There needs to be museums where you're able to never forget, always remember, know what happened, make sure the world never forgets. That's why we need to invest our time, our efforts, and our money. There was another school of thought that they said, we need to be taking care of our people now. Our people are coming from nothing. They're coming to America, Australia, Canada, wherever they were coming to with nothing. And they're trying to rebuild their lives. We need to create communal social service, social welfare programs that will help raise funds to feed people, to help them rebuild their lives, to provide jobs, all kinds of ways just to help them ease into life and rebuild. And indeed, many communities built amazing organizations and amazing infrastructure to help these people. My grandparents and many others rebuilt their lives with the assistance of the community in amazing ways. So for that, we need to apply our efforts, our time, and our money. And then that was dealing with the present. And then there were leaders, influencers, philanthropists who understood we need to invest on the future. You know what we need to do? Where should we put our time, our money, our efforts? Into schools, educational institutions. We need to make sure it never happens again. And the way that happens is by educating, by teaching our children and the children of the world about true life, about peace, about coexistence, about respect, about Jewish history, about knowing who we are and why we are and what is the goal here, and helping others understand this as well. And promoting the Torah not just to the Jews, but to the non-Jews also, because the Torah's values and many of its laws apply to non-Jews as well. The Torah is a script for all humans, Jews and non-Jews alike, in different ways. It's amazing. And they're all right. If there'd be no memory of the past, that would be a problem. If there'd be no dealing with the present, that'd be a problem. And if there'd be no investing in the future, that too would be a problem. But I think there needs to be a proper proportion, proper ratio of these things. And I think the majority amount of our efforts and time and money needs to be invested in the future. We're only going to make sure it never happens again, talking about the Holocaust. We're only going to make sure that we, the Jewish nation, or we, the human people, will get to where we're supposed to get to and accomplish our role in this universe if we invest in the future, if we recognize the future. So many people don't understand the goals, don't understand why we are here and what it's all about. We need to remember where we come from. We need to be very mindful and active for the present moment, but we need to more so think about the future. Great leaders knew this. Great leaders inspired their people about the awesome responsibility and privilege we have to be a part of history and a part of preparing the stage, the world, for the future. I want to share with you a story. Such a powerful story. When I was a student in yeshiva, I went one Sukkot. We built a sukkah-mobile, you know, on the back of the trucks, the pickup trucks. You've probably seen them around. And we went in Philadelphia to downtown, trying to find Jewish people on the streets. The festival of Sukkot, come inside the sukkah, shake the love and etrog, eat something, do a mitzvah. And we were finding a lot of people on the streets. It was very beautiful. Music was blaring, we were having a good time. Suddenly, behind us, this huge, 15-passenger van stops, parks, and out walks mother, the father, and a whole line of children. A very religious family, must have been 9 or 10 children. And I'm wondering, have you not done the mitzvah yet today? I mean, I would assume you have, but they come over and they say, actually, we left home very early this morning because we're traveling on vacation. We didn't have a chance. Can we come into the sukkah also? Check love and etrog, eat in the sukkah. I said, sure, with pleasure. It's not just for non-religious Jews, it's for all people to want to experience. Of course, come in. During the family's time in the sukkah, the mother, who was a very religious woman, her hair was covered. She pulled me to the side and she said, I want you to know something. You see the way I look today? I didn't always look this way. This is not how I was raised. I was raised very secular. Many years ago, probably 25 years before that, when I was in college, somebody just like you had a truck just like this and pulled me in, and I wasn't interested. And I said no. But they not forced me or pressured me, but they reached out with a lot of kindness and a lot of goodwill. And so finally I was convinced. I came in and I did the mitzvah. I ate in the sukkah. I made a blessing. And we sat down and we talked. It's that conversation that changed the future of my life. And today, look at me. I'm a proud Jew. I'm an active Jew. I'm an educated Jew. I've raised a wonderful Jewish family, all of which I could never imagine when I was 25 years ago in college. It's not the education I got in my home. I'm sitting there listening to this story. And first I'm thinking, wow, amazing, beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. And then I'm thinking to myself, that person, 25 years earlier, who reached out to this person, to this woman, has no idea about the story. They just think they took a college student, did a mitzvah, one-off thing, hit and run, and she's moved on. They didn't realize that planted a seed of change, of growth. And now 25 years later, I am seeing the results of their hard work. That's how it goes. That's how it goes. We don't always or necessarily know the results of our efforts. We don't need to. Ours is not the job to accomplish, ours is the job to work hard. We dedicate our lives planting seeds. Sometimes we'll be there to see them grow, and sometimes we won't. Perhaps the carobs will grow 70 years later and we won't be there. But that doesn't take away from our awesome privilege and responsibility to begin the process. Such an amazing concept, because when you believe this way and you're working towards the goal, and we understand the mission and the future and how we're supposed to be a part of it. You know the famous expression from Gandhi, who said, be the change you want to see in the world. Really? How are you going to make that change? You're going to be it. And by you being it, that's already a step. That's already, you've made a dent in the universe. I think Steve Jobs said, we're here to make a dent in the universe. Otherwise, what are we doing over here? Tonight, the 12th of Tammuz, the 13th of Tammuz, in the Hasidic community, or the Jewish community at large, we're celebrating a Hasidic festival, the day of the liberation of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who in communist Russia was fighting a battle. And he was imprisoned with a death sentence. And that was commuted, but then it was going to be 12 years in a gulag in Siberia, which is not survivable. It's practically a death sentence. And that too was commuted, and eventually after 3 weeks, he was liberated on this day. And I want us just to appreciate what we're celebrating, because this ties into the theme of this evening's discussion. In communist Russia, back in the 1920s, they were on an effort to eradicate, all minorities, but to eradicate religion. And Judaism and Jews was part of the main goal. And many Jewish communities and Jewish people suffered from this. Shabbat was outlawed, the Brit Milah, circumcision, schools for the children, a mikveh, everything, kosher. But the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, had nothing of this. He said, we're on a mission over here. We need to make sure this survives, this carries on, we'll pull through, and we'll come out on the other side like we've always done. He could have said, like many would have said, I'm our hands are tied. What should we do? It's illegal. If we do, we're going to be shot. We're going to be killed. Let's just lay low. If they would have laid low, there may have been no memory of this many years later. He didn't lay low. He stood up and he built a national network all over the country, all over the region. He built an army of soldiers, his followers, his students. He, in fact, once invited 10 Hasidim, 10 of his students, to come and join him. This is in 1924, I believe, or 23. And he sat with them one night and he said, my friends, I'm turning to you. I want us to all make a pact, a covenant together, that you and I, our group, is going to fight for the sake of God and for the sake of Judaism with our absolute fullest efforts, even if it means to spill our blood and take our last breath. But we're going to fight to make sure the story continues and the flame remains alive. Sure enough, they were in. Some of them did not survive, in fact. The way it worked was the Rebbe would send a school teacher to clandestinely teach a group of students. Maybe that teacher was found and discovered by the Soviets, by the Russians, shot, killed. Somebody else was sent in his place. Someone was sent to be a mohel, to do circumcisions, all in secrecy. Someone was sent to build a mikveh. The mikveh was destroyed, we built another one. Someone was sent to be a shochet, a slaughterer, to prepare kosher meat. Whatever it was. They were fighting. They were fighting, and many, many lost their lives, and many suffered terribly. Yet here we are, 2021. I'm in Miami. You are wherever you are. Our flame is not just alive. Our flame is burning strong, stronger than ever. It didn't happen by mistake. It didn't happen by itself. It didn't happen naturally. It happened because at the toughest of times, there were people, great leaders and their followers, who lived not just in the present, dealing with the hardships, acquiescing to the hardships, but they lived in the future. They knew there's a mission, and nothing in the world can get in the way of that, no matter how daunting and difficult it seems. And they put their necks out there, and they sometimes made the ultimate sacrifice. But because of them, because of our heroes throughout history, who understood the responsibility of making sure the story of the Jewish people continues until we've reached the end of days, which is the promise and the goal of all of his creation. Here we are. So at this point, who are we compared to those giants? We're nobody. We're small people. We have a tough time functioning if the air conditioning doesn't work one day. But there's a famous analogy. The analogy says, we're like dwarfs on giants' shoulders. The story goes that there was once a giant and a dwarf, and they wanted to see the king's palace, and so they start walking together to go see the king's palace. They wanted to see the royalty, the majesty, but they get to the wall surrounding the palace, and the wall was too high. The giant is there, but it's just over the eyes of the giant, and he cannot see, but he wants to see. And then he has an idea. He takes the dwarf. The dwarf for sure can't see. The dwarf can't even get past the first row of bricks. He puts the dwarf on his shoulders and he says, can you see? And the dwarf says, I see it. Describe it to me. And he describes the beauty. The dwarf could see and the giant couldn't see. Not because the dwarf was a giant, but because the dwarf sat on the shoulders of giants. We may be dwarfs, but we sit on the shoulders of giants. We sit on the shoulders of the efforts, the dedications, the sacrifices of our ancestors, of previous generations, of people who understood that you plant a tree now for in 70 years' time for fruits to grow. And now it's our turn. And now we need to live that way, with that level of awareness and responsibility. Maybe, just maybe, hopefully, we'll be the dwarf on the giant's shoulders. We will see the king's palace. We will see the fulfillment of the end of days that the prophets teach us about. And it'll happen because of our efforts of bringing this over to the end of the finish line. So, my friends, what a beautiful story. All from the lesson of this simple person. It wasn't even Choni who taught the story. It's this simple person who taught the story to Choni. But that's what he saw. So Gary tells us that it's the ripple effect that we never knew the results of being nice and caring for another person. 100%. Happens all the time. And our problem is that we want to see it. You don't have to see it. You have to do it. Somebody will see it. And even if nobody sees it, somebody will gain from it. And that's the most important thing. Roz, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Good luck. Hang in there. Work hard. We're getting there. We're getting closer. And I wish you all a good night. And thank you for joining us. See you next week, same place and same time.